She saved a ruthless mafia boss. Now he'll burn the world to protect her. Rain pounded the streets of South Chicago. McDaniel stumbled out of a black SUV riddled with bullets, his black shirt soaked in blood, leather jacket torn. His knuckles were bruised, his gun empty. Sirens wailed far off, but he kept moving, dragging himself toward a flickering diner sign, Ruth's Corner Cafe. Inside, Ruth was locking the doors, hair tied back, apron damp from cleaning. She froze when glass shattered. At her entrance, a man collapsed, soaked and trembling. Her heart raced. She recognized the danger in his presence, yet his eyes held a raw vulnerability that stopped her. "Don't call anyone, please," he whispered, voice strained. Ruth hesitated, unsure if helping him would save her or destroy her. The rain-slicked street reflected his pale face, the blood, and the desperation in his stare. What would you do if the man everyone feared most in the city appeared at your door, begging for your help? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, another story drops that you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one. Rain still fell in thick sheets outside Ruth's Corner Cafe. The diner was quiet except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional drip from the leaking roof. Ruth knelt beside McDaniel, pressing a cloth against the deep gash in his shoulder. Blood soaked through her makeshift bandage and ran onto the tile floor. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't move away. His breathing was shallow, each inhale rattled with pain. She noticed the taut muscles in his arms, the way his fists clenched even in weakness. She had never seen anyone so strong, so controlled, unravel into vulnerability so completely. He didn't speak, but his eyes followed her every movement, sharp and alert despite his injuries. "Just hold still," she whispered. A flash of memory crossed his face, quick, involuntary. A warehouse, guns fired, men he once trusted turning on him. He remembered the heat of betrayal, the sudden, shocking pain when his closest allies had tried to kill him. That memory made his jaw tighten, a flicker of anger passing through his eyes. He wasn't used to needing help. Ruth worked silently, cleaning his wounds, rinsing the blood, applying antiseptic. She could feel his gaze on her, and the weight of it made her heart race. She wanted answers, needed to know who he was, why someone so dangerous was here, bleeding in her diner. "You saved the wrong man," he said finally, voice hoarse and low. Ruth didn't flinch. "Maybe I saved the man you could still become." He studied her, something unreadable in his expression. He didn't respond, only shifted slightly, letting her continue. Hours passed. The storm outside began to fade, replaced by the early gray light of morning. Before sunrise, he was gone. The back door swung quietly on its hinges. On the counter, a single note lay in Ruth's handwriting, careful, measured, "Lock your doors, and don't go to the docks tonight." Ruth stared at the note, her hand still trembling, the memory of his voice lingering in her mind. Who was he, and what had she just let into her life? The city was changing. Fires burned along the docks, warehouses gutted by flames and smoke. Gunfire rang out in neighborhoods, followed by sirens that seemed powerless to stop the chaos. Rumors spread fast. People whispered about the Wolf, a name that chilled the hearts of anyone who knew Chicago's underground. Ruth watched the news one evening, a cup of coffee forgotten in her hands. The screen showed grainy footage of a man moving through the wreckage, his black jacket torn, his face marked by bruises and cuts. And then she recognized him, McDaniel. The man she had dragged inside her diner, tended to in her own hands, was the same figure commanding fear across the city. Her pulse quickened. Fear and relief collided inside her. She had saved a dangerous man, and yet, part of her felt an unexpected attachment, a curiosity she couldn't explain. She set the cup down and leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the screen as his image flickered, surrounded by chaos. That night, the first black car appeared. Parked across the street, engine idling silently. Ruth watched it from the window, heart pounding, every instinct on edge. Another night, another car. She felt watched, aware of eyes following her, yet strangely safe, as if a silent guardian shadowed her movements. A week later, as she closed the diner, two men approached from the alley beside the cafe. Their suits were neat, faces hard, hands brushing the sides of their jackets like they carried weapons. "Where is he?" one asked, voice low and controlled. "You know him. He owes us." Ruth's hands shook slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to sound steady. The men stepped closer. Ruth backed toward the door, adrenaline burning in her chest. Then headlights split the darkness. A sleek black car skidded to a stop in front of the alley. The men froze, eyes widening. From the car stepped McDaniel, his presence immediate, magnetic, and threatening. He didn't speak at first. He walked toward them, slow, controlled, every step radiating danger. Ruth's fear surged, yet she felt relief she couldn't name. The men faltered under his gaze, stepping back, then turned and ran without looking back. McDaniel's attention shifted to her. He didn't smile, didn't speak lightly. His voice was calm, measured, but carried a warning. "Kindness has a cost, Ruth. Saving me, it doesn't end with gratitude. It changes everything." Ruth swallowed hard, meeting his eyes. "I don't regret it," she said quietly, "even knowing what it could bring." For a long moment, the rain falling softly around the diner, he studied her. Something shifted between them, an understanding deeper than words. Two people, bound by fate and circumstance, caught in a web of fear and compassion. "You've changed my world," he admitted, voice low. "And I don't know how to repay that, or protect you from the rest of mine." She stepped closer, cautious yet unafraid. "Then don't protect me because of fear. Protect me because you want to." He looked at her, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, replaced by a quiet intensity. Outside, the city raged, fires lighting the horizon, sirens echoing against steel and glass. Inside, two lives collided, fragile yet strong, connected in a moment that neither fully understood. That night, Ruth locked the doors behind her. She watched the street, the black cars appearing again, waiting, knowing he was near. She realized her life had shifted. She had unknowingly stepped into his world, the dangerous, violent world he ruled. But for the first time, she also sensed protection, and something like trust. Over the next days, McDaniel returned sporadically, each time leaving her with more than safety. He left questions, confusion, and a subtle sense of closeness that unsettled her. She wondered if she would ever see him openly, without shadows and silent tension, without threats lurking in the corners of the city. When another attempt to intimidate her occurred, this time two men leaning close enough to snatch her off the street, McDaniel appeared again, moving like a storm contained within a man. Calm, dangerous, and unyielding. He cleared the threat without raising his voice, without hesitation, leaving Ruth standing in the rain, heart racing. "You're making choices that could hurt you," he said, voice low. "And yet you continue. You understand the risk." She nodded, shivering from the cold and the adrenaline. "I understand. And I still would do it. Because I believe, even if you're feared, even if your world is chaos, people can choose to be better." For the first time, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. His eyes softened, not entirely, not completely, but enough that Ruth saw the man he could be, hidden beneath layers of violence and survival. They both remained in the doorway for a while, watching the empty street. Rain streaked their clothes, dripping from his hair, soaking her sleeves. No one spoke for a long moment. It was a silence that carried understanding, fear, and a strange, budding respect. As he finally turned to leave, McDaniel glanced back. "You've changed my world in ways I don't know how to repay," he said. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure nothing touches you." Ruth nodded silently. She knew then that her decision to help him had unleashed forces she could neither control nor predict. Yet, strangely, she didn't feel powerless. She had shown him a spark of human kindness, and it was already reshaping him in ways the city could not yet see. The lights of the diner reflected on the wet streets, black cars disappearing into the distance. Ruth stood inside, heart racing, a mix of fear and curiosity swirling within her. The man she had saved was no longer just a stranger. He was a presence, a shadow that had entered her life, bringing both danger and an inexplicable sense of security. And as the city outside burned and roared, Ruth realized something she hadn't expected. She had become part of McDaniel's world, whether she wanted to or not. McDaniel didn't leave Ruth's life entirely. In the days that followed the black cars and threatening men, he remained near, moving quietly through the shadows outside her cafe, watching, protecting, ensuring she was safe without her even knowing. He repaired the broken lock on the back door, tightened the hinges, and left no sign of his presence except a small slip of paper with a warning or a simple note saying he had checked. Ruth noticed the subtle changes, a door no longer squeaking, a street corner cleared of suspicious figures, the faint assurance that danger no longer moved freely near her. At first, she felt unsettled. She didn't know if she should be grateful or afraid, but gradually, she realized he was there because of her. Because of the choice she had made to help him. Late one night, after the cafe had closed and the rain had subsided, she heard a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, he was standing there, drenched, the city lights reflecting off his leather jacket. There was a raw tension in his eyes, the kind that came from a lifetime of decisions made in darkness. "I've burned cities for less than what they tried to do to you," he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of all the nights he had survived and the lives he had taken. Ruth didn't flinch. She looked at him and finally began to understand. She saw the man beneath the armor of muscles and reputation. The man shaped by a life of violence, hardened to survive, yet desperate for some form of redemption. He wasn't just dangerous. He was trapped in his own code, bound by choices he could not undo. Over the following weeks, their connection grew in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. McDaniel would appear without warning, sometimes to help her close the diner, sometimes simply to share a meal she had left on the counter. They spoke little at first, short sentences, observations about the city, about her work, about the small rhythms of life she still clung to. But in those silences, meaning was exchanged. Shared meals became a ritual, quiet conversations turned into confidences, and the space between words carried more than either could say aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped low over South Chicago, two men appeared on the street near the cafe. They moved with precision and confidence, the kind that immediately told Ruth she was their target. She felt her stomach twist as one of them reached toward her. Before she could react, McDaniel was there. He struck quickly, a controlled storm of strength and skill. The attackers barely had a chance to react before they were on the ground, retreating with muttered curses. Ruth's heart raced as she looked at him. He was wounded, a deep cut along his arm bleeding steadily, but he didn't falter. She rushed to him, grabbing her first aid kit. "You need to sit," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You're hurt badly." He leaned against the counter, teeth clenched, breathing hard. "I told you, you made me do this. For you." Ruth carefully cleaned the wound, bandaging it with steady hands despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She met his gaze and said softly, "I didn't make you do anything. You chose to protect me." He let out a low sigh, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough for her to see the weight he carried. "You made me remember what it's like to feel human," he admitted. His voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable, a stark contrast to the controlled, dangerous man the city feared. Ruth paused for a moment, the reality of his words settling in. He had been a man of violence for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to care, to be affected by someone else. And yet here he was, wounded and weary, showing her a piece of himself he rarely let anyone see. For a long while, neither spoke. She continued to clean and bandage him, the soft sounds of the city outside filtering through the cafe's windows. It was quiet, intimate, and something in the way he looked at her told her that he trusted her, in a way he had never trusted anyone before. "I can't promise this world will leave you alone," he said finally, voice firm again, carrying a trace of his old edge. "But I can promise. I'll be there. Always." Ruth nodded, understanding both the danger and the devotion in his words. She realized their connection had grown beyond fear or obligation. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. The man who had once inspired terror now inspired something different, a strange sense of safety, of loyalty, and of trust. That night, as the city hummed outside, Ruth watched him leave. The rain had returned, coating the streets in reflective light. He disappeared into the shadows, but she knew he was near, and that knowledge was more comforting than she could explain. She cleaned the last traces of blood from the counter, her thoughts returning again and again to the moment he had admitted he felt human again. Something had shifted, irrevocably. Their bond had strengthened, not through grand gestures, but through quiet acts of protection, trust, and shared vulnerability. For Ruth, life was never the same. The diner remained her sanctuary, but now it carried a weight of both danger and hope. And for McDaniel, every act of protection, every glance toward her, every careful step he took in her world reminded him that redemption, however fragile, was possible. The line between fear and care had blurred, and both of them felt it, an unspoken truth that neither dared name, yet both understood. Their lives had collided in ways that would not be undone, setting the stage for the challenges yet to come. McDaniel drove Ruth away from the city late one night. The streets blurred past under the dim glow of streetlights, and the wind rattled the windows of the car. She didn't speak much, but she felt the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched every few seconds, and the careful way he held the wheel. They arrived at a small cabin near the edge of Lake Michigan. Snow had begun to fall lightly, covering the pine trees and the wooden roof in a soft layer. The cabin was modest, but warm. Ruth noticed the fire already burning in the hearth, and the faint scent of wood smoke filled the air. He led her inside, gesturing for her to sit while he checked the perimeter. Even here, away from the city, McDaniel's eyes never stopped scanning. His protective instinct had become instinctual, a second skin he couldn't shed. Finally, he sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, eyes distant. "I've never told anyone this," he said, voice low. "I grew up on the streets. Life taught me that survival meant making choices no one else could understand. I learned to fight before I could walk properly. I learned to trust no one, not even the people I called family. And in the end, they turned on me." Ruth listened quietly. She could see the weight in his expression, the lines in his face that weren't just from age, but from years of danger and betrayal. "That kind of life," she said softly, "it leaves scars, but it doesn't have to define you forever." He looked at her, the corner of his mouth almost lifting. "Maybe not. But most of the people I've cared for, they didn't make it." His eyes darkened, a shadow crossing the room as he thought of lost friends, lost allies, lives ended too soon. Ruth leaned forward, gently touching his arm. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it allows you to choose peace over pain. You can carry your past without letting it control your future. He studied her, silent for a long moment. There was no sudden change, no dramatic shift. Just a quiet understanding passing between them. The walls he had built around himself remained, but now there was a small space where trust could grow. Over the following days, their connection deepened. McDaniel stayed close to the cabin, maintaining vigilance while Ruth cooked, cleaned, and settled into the rhythm of the quiet life. Their moments together were simple, a shared meal, a conversation about small things, a quiet laugh. The distance from the city allowed them to speak without fear, to breathe without constant danger pressing in. In those moments, a bond emerged, unspoken but strong. There was no grand confession, no declarations. Just the understanding that they relied on each other, that they had saved each other in ways neither could yet fully name. Ruth learned to see the man beyond the reputation, beyond the violence. And McDaniel discovered the courage to let someone care for him without fear of judgment. One morning, as the first light of day reflected off the frozen lake, a car approached the cabin from the far road. McDaniel saw it first, standing silently at the window, hands tensing. He recognized the engine, the shape. News had reached him. His rivals had tracked his location. Ruth's heart sank. She had feared this day, dreaded it even as she had begun to feel safe in this fragile sanctuary. "You don't have to face them," she said quietly, but firmly. "We can leave. We can hide somewhere else." He shook his head. "Running won't solve this. They're not just coming for me. They'll keep coming for anyone I care about. If I don't end this now, it never stops. But I'll come back. I promise. You gave me a reason to." Ruth swallowed, fear and hope warring inside her. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "I don't want you to risk yourself for me." "I'm not risking," he said. His eyes held something both dangerous and tender. "I'm protecting. And protecting isn't optional anymore. Not for you. Not for me." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the winter light casting a soft glow on their faces. The quiet cabin seemed like the only safe place in the world, yet McDaniel knew the world outside would not wait. Before he left, he took her hands in his. "You made me see a life worth fighting for," he said. "Even a man like me can want better. You showed me that. And for that, I can't thank you enough." Ruth squeezed his hands, steadying him as much as she steadied herself. "Then go," she said. "Do what you must. Just come back." He nodded once, firm and silent, before slipping out into the morning fog. Ruth watched from the cabin door as he disappeared toward the distant tree line, the crunch of snow under his boots fading, leaving only the wind across the frozen lake. Inside, Ruth felt the weight of what had passed. Fear lingered, yes, but alongside it was something stronger, a sense of hope, of trust, and of quiet love that had grown from courage, protection, and understanding. She knew he would face what awaited him, and she trusted him to return. The cabin grew still. Snow continued to fall, layering the world outside in white. Ruth moved through the room, her hands busy with small tasks, yet her mind lingered on him, on his words, on the promise he had made. This was not the end, not for her, not for him. The fight had not yet concluded, but for the first time, she felt they had each other to lean on when it did. And somewhere along the frozen lake, McDaniel moved through the trees, carrying both his past and a reason to fight, a reason Ruth had given him simply by trusting, by being kind, and by showing him a chance to be human again. McDaniel arrived in Gary, Indiana, under heavy rain. The city smelled of wet asphalt and rusted metal, the streets slick and abandoned. He drove past empty warehouses and shuttered buildings, each one a reminder of betrayal, the place where a man he once trusted had tried to end him. The streets were quiet, but McDaniel felt the weight of every step he would take tonight. The rail yard appeared like a memory etched in shadows. Rusted train cars leaned to one side, tracks disappearing into darkness. Water pooled in the dips of cracked concrete, reflecting the pale glow of overhead lights. His boots splashed as he walked, each step deliberate. He wasn't looking for vengeance. Not exactly. This fight was about more than settling scores. It was for Ruth. For the chance at a life that didn't revolve around fear. For the peace he hadn't allowed himself to grasp until now. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, familiar, with eyes that had once been his allies. The man moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had power over McDaniel. He sneered, raindrops running down his face like rivulets of past betrayals. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said, voice sharp. "Thought you'd be dead." "I'm here," McDaniel replied, voice steady, "to end this." The fight began immediately. Rain-soaked fists collided, the sound of metal, boots, and flesh echoing through the yard. McDaniel's movements were precise, a mix of muscle memory and instinct honed over years. Each strike carried purpose, not rage, but resolve. He blocked and countered, every action measured, every blow a statement. He wasn't the man who would be broken again. His former ally was strong, but unprepared for the control McDaniel exhibited now. It wasn't just skill, it was intention. He didn't aim to kill, not yet. He aimed to show that the man he had tried to destroy could rise above, and that his life would no longer be dictated by betrayal. The fight moved across puddles and rusty rails, boots slipping, fists bruising. McDaniel's shirt clung to his skin, torn and wet, muscles straining with effort. He remembered Ruth in every motion, the way she had saved him, trusted him, given him a reason to protect rather than destroy. That thought sharpened his focus. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. He didn't count. Finally, the man faltered, exhaustion and frustration mixing in his expression. McDaniel stepped back, breathing hard but controlled. "It ends here," he said, voice calm. "I don't fight for hate. I fight for her. I fight for peace. And I won't be broken again by people like you." The man looked at him, defeated not by physical blows, but by the quiet force of purpose behind them. McDaniel didn't strike again. He walked away, boots splashing in shallow pools, leaving the former ally behind. The rain fell harder now, washing away the marks of the fight, but the lesson remained clear. He had reclaimed control of his life, his choices, and his destiny. He paused at the edge of the rail yard, staring back once, the city around him silent except for the rain. For the first time in years, he felt a strange calm, a clarity he hadn't allowed himself to feel. The monster the city feared had acted, not out of vengeance, but out of love, protection, and the desire for a different life. The streets stretched empty ahead. McDaniel didn't rush. He didn't celebrate. He simply walked toward the road that would take him back to Ruth, back to the small sanctuary she had given him, back to the life he hoped he could still earn. The rain had eased, leaving streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights as McDaniel drove back toward Chicago. His clothes were soaked, his leather jacket torn, and blood stained his hands and forearms. Every muscle ached from the confrontation in Gary, but the thought of Ruth kept him moving. As he approached Ruth's corner cafe, he slowed, chest tight with anticipation. He wasn't sure what he would find. She could reject him. She could fear him now, knowing the life he carried. He parked quietly and stepped onto the wet pavement, water dripping from his hair, boots leaving marks in the puddles. Before he could reach the door, it opened. Ruth stood there, eyes steady, a faint smile on her lips. It was as if she had known he would return, as if she had been waiting all along. "Come in," she said softly. His heart thudded. He stepped inside, grateful for the warmth of the diner, the comforting smell of coffee and baked bread. He felt exposed, weary, and alive in a way he hadn't for years. Ruth guided him to a chair and quietly retrieved her first aid supplies. She wrapped his hands in bandages, moving carefully, with tenderness he hadn't expected. Each motion was deliberate, unhurried, and comforting. "You don't have to burn the world anymore," she said softly, looking into his eyes. "You're already home." He looked at her, feeling the weight of his past begin to lift. The city, the chaos, the violence, they no longer defined him. He was no longer the wolf, no longer the man whose name spread fear across the streets. Here, he was just a man who had been given a second chance. The warmth of the diner, the quiet strength in Ruth's voice, and the steady care in her hands softened the edges of the man he had been. His shoulders relaxed slightly, his eyes losing the edge of menace and opening to something human, something vulnerable yet strong. They sat in silence for a moment, the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Words were unnecessary. The understanding between them said everything. He had survived the fight, but more importantly, he had returned to the place and the person that gave him a reason to fight differently. Ruth's hand lingered on his for a moment longer, a quiet acknowledgement of trust, of connection. "You're safe now," she said simply. McDaniel nodded, swallowing hard. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe it. The city outside could rage, chaos could reign, and people could still try to hurt him. But here, in this small space, he was free. Free to be himself, free to find the light Ruth had shown him. He glanced around the diner, at the simple decor, the worn booths, and the glowing sign outside. It was nothing like the cities he had burned, nothing like the alleys where he had fought for survival. Yet it felt like the only place he had ever truly belonged. Ruth met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "You're home," she repeated softly. "No one can take that away from you." McDaniel let out a slow breath, a release he hadn't realized he had been holding. The tension in his body eased, the fight in his muscles replaced by a quiet gratitude. The man who had walked these streets as a predator now felt the strange, unfamiliar comfort of safety, of belonging, of being cared for. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. It was not a smile of victory or defiance, but one of relief and quiet hope. He had returned to Ruth, to the place that reminded him of what it meant to be human, to care, to feel. Ruth stepped back slightly, giving him space while her eyes remained on him. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "We'll figure out the rest together." He nodded again, feeling the weight of the world ease from his shoulders. Here, he didn't have to fight shadows or ghosts of his past. Here, he could simply exist, with someone who had believed in him when no one else had. The night stretched on, quiet and safe, the diner's warm light a stark contrast to the wet, dark streets outside. McDaniel sat, letting the silence settle around him, and for the first time, he understood that being human wasn't weakness. It was a choice, one Ruth had given him without demanding anything in return. No words were needed beyond what had already been said. He had returned, alive, blooded but whole, and he had found a place where he could finally belong. And in that belonging, he found something he hadn't felt in years: peace. A year had passed. The city moved on, its streets alive with the ordinary rhythm of life. Fires, betrayals, and threats were distant memories, fading into stories whispered by those who had survived them. Ruth's Corner Cafe thrived, the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filling the air every morning. Customers came and went, laughing, chatting, and finding comfort in the warmth of a place that felt like a small refuge from the chaos outside. McDaniel returned often, quietly, without fanfare. He would sit in the same booth by the window, his presence calm and measured. He no longer carried the tension of a man who had to survive in every moment. He carried gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the life Ruth had given him. Ruth watched him as he moved through the diner, noting the subtle ways he interacted with others, polite nods, gentle gestures, eyes that had softened from the man he had been. He no longer drew fear. He no longer demanded respect through intimidation. He simply existed, a man who had once been a storm but now moved like a steady current, carrying the lessons of the past with quiet dignity. One afternoon, a customer entered and paused near his booth. Recognition flitted across their face, and their voice dropped to a whisper. "Is that McDaniel?" The diner went silent for a heartbeat. Some eyes darted toward him, tense with curiosity or unease. He lifted his gaze, calm, unreadable. Ruth stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "He's just a man now," she said softly, with certainty, as if her words could reshape the story the city had written about him. The tension in the room eased. Conversations resumed, laughter returned, and the soft clatter of cups and plates filled the air. McDaniel allowed himself a quiet smile, one that reached his eyes and lingered there. He had survived the worst of the city, the betrayal, the battles, but it wasn't the fights or the blood that gave him peace. It was this: kindness, trust, and the chance to be human again. Ruth returned to her counter, busy with orders, yet always keeping an eye on him. The subtle bond between them had endured the storms of the past year, unspoken but undeniable. He had learned to lean on her, not just for protection, but for understanding, for a quiet strength that had reshaped him from the inside. Evenings at the diner became a rhythm. McDaniel would sit, Ruth would prepare meals, and the world outside could wait. Sometimes they shared stories, laughter, or silence that spoke more than any words. He had found a place where he didn't have to fight constantly, where he could rest, and where the world's expectations could not reach him. One night, as rain fell softly against the diner windows, McDaniel looked across the table at Ruth. The neon sign outside reflected in the wet streets, casting a warm glow into the room. He met her gaze and asked, quietly, with a note of vulnerability that had once been impossible, "You ever regret saving me?" Ruth smiled, a slow, calm smile that carried the weight of everything they had endured. "Not once," she said. Her voice was steady, gentle. "Sometimes, saving one soul saves 100 more." He nodded, letting the words settle. There were no dramatic gestures, no declarations. Just understanding, connection, and quiet fulfillment. Redemption had come not from the battles he had fought or the blood he had shed, but through the trust and care she had shown him. He had survived the worst parts of the city, but it was kindness that had given him life again. The diner hummed with its usual rhythm. Customers chatted softly, coffee machines hissed, and the occasional laugh punctuated the air. Outside, the city moved through its familiar chaos, unaware of the small sanctuary that thrived at the corner of an ordinary street. McDaniel stayed in his booth a while longer, looking out the window at the gentle rain. It was peaceful, the water reflecting the light of the street lamps, the neon glow of Ruth's sign, and the soft warmth of the cafe within. He thought about the path that had brought him here, the fights, the betrayals, the danger, and how one act of courage and kindness had shifted the course of his life entirely. Ruth came to stand beside him, her presence familiar and grounding. She didn't speak, only offered a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed. Sometimes words weren't necessary. They had built something enduring, a bond forged through fear, compassion, and trust. As the night wore on, customers left, leaving only a few regulars and the steady hum of the cafe. McDaniel finally rose, stretching muscles that had grown accustomed to tension, and looked at Ruth with a quiet smile. The man who had once been feared across cities now felt whole. "You've given me more than I can ever repay," he said softly. "You don't need to," she replied. "Just being here is enough." He nodded, absorbing the weight and simplicity of her words. He had walked through fire, faced betrayal, survived battles, and endured chaos, But it was in this small cafe, beside Ruth, that he had truly found peace. The neon sign outside glowed under the soft rain, Ruth's Corner Cafe. A small light that never went out. Inside, two lives intertwined, quiet, steadfast, and rebuilt through courage, trust, and kindness. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, a life of redemption and hope continued, gentle but unwavering. For McDaniel, the wolf was gone. In its place stood a man who had discovered that survival wasn't enough. What mattered most was connection, compassion, and the choice to live differently. And in Ruth's Corner Cafe, he had found that choice, and embraced it fully. In a world where fear and revenge often guide actions, one act of kindness can remind someone they're still human. Ruth didn't save McDaniel because he deserved it. She saved him because she believed in the goodness hidden deep inside every person. That single choice changed both their lives forever. Love and redemption don't always arrive in perfect packages. Sometimes, they grow quietly, born from courage, understanding, and forgiveness. Small gestures, acts of trust, and the willingness to see the good in someone can transform even the darkest paths. If you believe kindness can still change lives, let us know in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable stories like this one. Tomorrow, another powerful story will await you.